Hey YouTube.
Welcome back.
What's up, guys? Welcome to this growing family. Thank you so much for those who subscribed
Appreciate it. We appreciate
and
it.
are following us. So today is probably a first of many to come. It's gonna be our little relationship talk and conversation. Victor and I usually have these conversations. We feel like we have interesting conversations, but maybe they're not that interesting to everybody else. But
You'll be the judge. 3 under 2 kind of dummies down your intelligence.
but no, we are today we're talking about what were we talking about early on?
Oh,
It's marriage,
marriage,
and
family.
is it no? I guess we'll title it "Trouble in the Marriage." That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Trouble in the
Yeah,
marriage.
yeah,
Trouble in the marriage. So, babe, usually when people say trouble in the, I'm the interviewer here, and Victor's one who's going to be talking all. But usually when you hear there's trouble in the marriage, what comes to mind?
It could just be a number of things. It's actually kind of a crazy. I think what we were just talking about was how the language we use around marriage is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
As we are in a culture that is particularly, that's a global thing really now, but marriage is being redefined by sexual orientation and different things like that. But in our context, the more traditional, I guess you could say, the more traditional context of marriage, historically there's just been some very strange words and ideas that have been used. Like just as she mentioned the word trouble. It's like when people say they're having trouble in a marriage and you listen to what the trouble is, it's just like, oh, you just having growing pains. Mm. It's like, why is that being called trouble?
Like what? I guess what could we define as?
Well, and the reason I say the word trouble is a troublesome word is because, yeah, well, the reason I say this is a troublesome word is because trouble has a connotation of something happening out of the ordinary or something happening outside of the plan, something happening beyond the scope of expectation. But like if you
so basically what the connotation is that if there's trouble in the marriage, that means that marriage is supposed to be smooth.
Absolutely.
No, the normal should be smooth, no issues, no problems. And then when you come upon an issue, a roadblock, a bump, then we define those as trouble. Is what people do.
Yeah, and I'm saying even that language should be just taken out, and it should be just called the growing journey.
But can growing, I'll ask this and I think we'll probably come back to it. Can a growing journey turn into a trouble in a marriage?
Oh, I think it definitely can, but many times at the elementary level of these growing stages, it's being labeled as trouble. That's
real.
Because there isn't an honest evaluation at times of who the person is, and so many times like we kind of still have this fairy tale idea of what it should be. And I know we've talked about this before, just how it's taking me some time to adjust to the norms of being a father, a father, a husband, and a professional, and a person, and so like I just keep having to have, and I guess for lack of better terms, the same funeral for these values that I held. Like I used to have free time and kind of could move the free time around the way that I chose, and it's like, well, that you better have a funeral for that, because 3 under 2, like that reality is gone. And so
For those who don't know, three for us we just
Oh,
use three
three
under
under
two.
two.
Like it's just an everyday term for us. It is, but three
Three
under two
children
is
under 2 years old.
okay.
Yeah. So,
um, but and really, as you're saying, sorry to cut you.
no. Go
But
ahead.
as you were saying, when we think about it that way, then that means that there's always been trouble.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if that's the case,
If
absolutely.
that's the case,
Yeah.
then every marriage would be
Yeah.
there'll be some kind of trouble because I think like Victor has mentioned about for us the growing pains of transitioning to parenthood um, can are that's a stressor.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't a lot of us don't like using the word stress because I think that's another word that's been turned into a very demonized
Yeah.
negative word. The reality is some stress is good in terms of indicating to you that take a pause, take some time to deal with whatever it is that is causing the stress.
Or
I mean, engineering, you can even share like what a stressor does, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, but even not just getting rid of stress, but learning to manage it.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
That you learn how to properly include it in the equation. I mean, you mentioned about engineering. Just from a load perspective, like buildings are designed to carry certain loads.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have bridges, and in the part of the structural design, they calculate and factor in that snow's going to be sitting on it. They calculate and factor in that vehicles are going to be sitting on it, and so they anticipate that stress, that load that the structure should carry, and it's supposed to last that. So it's the stress being carried properly is a part of the journey. Mm-hmm. And so just really kind of redefining terminology. Mm-hmm. And it really kind of popped up because in talking to multiple friends, I remember when we first got married, there was a couple of friends that had been married for a couple of years. And they said, hey, man, there are going to be some days where it's frustrating. There are going to be some days where you need somebody to bounce ideas off of and vent and just a variety of things. It's like, I'm just here for you. And that meant so much to me. Mm-hmm. That meant so much to me because it was the very important message that you don't go through this journey by yourselves. Like, you're married to each other, but you really need a healthy support system in order to go through the growing journey in the most effective way. And so, so they shared that with me. And so I've just continued to pay it forward to other brothers that are new in marriage. And I mean, we're 6 years in. But yeah, it's just a part of it's growing.
But that's real, babe, because I really honestly feel like that that's kind of like a turns things upside down kind of thing.
Yeah.
And how many I say this not to make light of marriages, especially like we said we're 6 years in, and that's major, but that's also we're young.
Still babies.
We're babies in this thing.
Yeah.
But their reason for divorce or separation was there was trouble in the marriage. And again, there are many different reasons. So I'm just talking about one aspect of what could cause a divorce, and how changing the mindset to thinking of trouble and thinking of marriage as a growing journey, and the bumps that come up as you're growing in this journey not being trouble, but more so growing pains. That's, and I think somebody can probably hear that and say, you're minimizing.
You don't know my story.
You don't know my story, and you're minimizing my pain, and you're minimizing what I've been through. Again, like we're saying, that there is a place for trouble in a marriage.
Oh no, no,
That
absolutely,
statement is there, it exists, and it's real.
absolutely.
What we are saying is there's some things that start out as growing pains,
Yeah.
and not necessarily saying that, because if you're looking at marriage as it should all be smooth, and when we come across this thing, then that means we have trouble in the marriage. Say, let's use communication. Communication for us is something that we
Yeah.
are definitely growing in, and we've been growing in for the duration of our
6 years, yeah.
marriage. And so when we came up against communication, I guess we could have defined that as trouble in the marriage.
Oh
Because
yeah.
it was a big deal.
I know it
it was a big deal. And so, but I wouldn't see it as trouble in the marriage, and I would literally see it as what you just said,
Yeah.
growing pains.
But then you can also see how
It can,
sometimes it can turn into trouble, and I do get why some people may use the term trouble, because it can be a fine line. But I think many times, I think there's a benefit to seeing it as growing pains, because you will approach it differently if you see it as growing pains or a part of the growing journey, as opposed to seeing it as trouble
from the get-go.
Yeah. So if you see this as, okay, this is a part of what the system is intended to recognize, that there are some places of growth that we need, and it's recognizing those areas of growth, as opposed to I'm troubleshooting. Like troubleshooting is something different. And so
And I think the analogy of, like we're saying, that growing pain, a situation that's a growing pain in a marriage can turn into trouble. So it's like, and one may say, well, then growing pains just makes it seem like hang in there, it's going to get better. Not because, for instance, if you have a child who is growing, like growing pains, you need to change their shoe size. Like they cannot wear size 7 anymore. They have to now wear an 8 or 9. And if you don't change the shoe and you keep trying to stick their foot in there, it's going to start to hurt. It's going to get to a place where it becomes more of a medical issue. So that's just saying that a growing pain can turn into something,
if not properly
lethal, and if not properly addressed. So you have to do some work, even in growing pains. When you define something as growing pains, you have to do some work to make sure that this growing pain does not turn into trouble. So we can use communication as an example. Like,
oh yeah, I struggle.
What was the struggle for us?
So I'll speak for me. It was complicated. I graduated from high school, went to college, and 18 left home, and never really returned. So after leaving home, I come home for summers, but I was there for a month, 2, and I was back off by myself. And so we got married I was 27 when we got married. And so for better part of almost 8-9 years, I was running my own schedule. And so I didn't necessarily need to check in with anybody, need to communicate where I was going, why I was going, and those type of things. And so when we got married, like, I was still kind of running on that cycle. And I still do have relapses. I still do have relapses, but I was running on that cycle, and I wasn't understanding like why it was so frustrating to her, why I wasn't communicating my schedule. It's just like, hey, I got a schedule. Like it just, and it took, honestly, and it wasn't, and I'm sure there was some stubbornness, resistance to changing that I was going through. But the other part of it was I just wasn't getting it. Like for 9 years, you're used to doing things a certain way. And so all of a sudden it's supposed to just change. And it's like, well, it doesn't change overnight. And I know it was frustrating hurtful and disrespectful, in just all honesty. And that's something that I've had to apologize for multiple times as I've become more aware of when I have failed in communicating properly, particularly with scheduling. And so, but that was something that I had to learn. But it wasn't trouble. It was just a part of growing.
We identified it
Yeah,
when it started.
correct.
But you can see how if
Well,
we
yeah,
didn't
you identified because I didn't see it that way.
it was me. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't quite see it that way, and I think it's also important to note, like, this was critical because you you left home a little later
I
than
did leave home a little
Yes.
later.
So when we started dating, a year after we started dating was like the first time you left home for a
Yeah.
significant amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so 23, 20. Well, I mean, I'll leave you. You
Oh,
tell
maybe you
you.
can say I don't remember dates. I don't
Okay.
remember.
But I know it was 2012, I think, when
Yeah.
you left home. So
Mm-hmm.
we got married in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
24.
yeah, so for 2 years, like, so it's like it was something new. While for me, it was, this is this is almost a decade old.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was that type of adjustment that was being made. And so, like, when you're thinking about just almost a 10-year-old habit,
Mm-hmm.
and then you compound on that there are almost 25, 26-year-old habits that have been cultivated and are so deep rooted, like, to change that's a process. Like, that's a process. So it's I mean, that's one thing that's going to be constant about life. Change, and to resist it is to die a slow, torturous death. And so, yeah, that was a very significant area. And so there's steps, there's progress that I've made. There's still a long way that I have to go, but there's progress that I've made, and I think that's what has prevented it from becoming trouble for us. If, like in the analogy that you gave, if I continue to try to fit the same shoe, a size 7 on a size 9 foot, and issues began to create with feet and legs and all the other the referred pain and other issues. That's when you have trouble. But recognizing and seeing the different challenges is really a part of the journey. And I think in this whole culture, particularly within our faith tradition of Christianity, there's a talk, particularly among the African diaspora, of decolonizing. And I think this is where, in some respect, the idea of what marriage is and the journey really has to be redefined as well. Redefined, and there has to be a very clear, I don't want to use the word decolonize per se, because that's generally more dealing with political and governmental expansion and domination. But in a sense, there is that idea that also needs to be done in marriage as well, because they're just ideas that we uphold as quality principles that are really just protecting our resistance to being vulnerable. And we call them good, we call them virtuous, and really what it is it's just a way to hide behind our fear of vulnerability.
That's a can of worms. You opened it up.
Yeah. Well,
But I want to say that one of the things that we discovered, like, as we have transitioned from dating to married to being married to being parents, we are learning that and we've shared this with a lot of our friends as well, that whatever it is that is a little bit of a tug when you're dating and when you get married, it only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So when we were dating, communication wasn't really much of, it didn't come up. And I don't think it's that it wasn't a problem. I think the circumstances really did not allow for it to come up. Case in point, we were in a long distance relationship for most of our dating life. And so we communicated. So you really it didn't seem like there was any type of communication problem. And I was 3 hours away. I mean, not 3 hours away. There was a 3 hour time difference. I was not 3 hours away. He was in Michigan. I was in California. So it was a 3 hour time difference. So we had scheduled time that you're in class, I'm in class. We know we're going to talk at this time. You don't really see that there's communication problems. And then in terms of scheduling, and then come marriage. And at that time, it's just like, we are two adults. Like, why is it a big deal? But I don't know. Something just kept on coming up to me that it is a big deal. I would like to know and to be aware. And I can see now that had we not addressed it, because when we first got married, Victor was working full time. I was not working yet. So it's like, this is not a big deal. But then it became a bigger deal when we were both working. Mm-hmm. And then an even bigger deal when we became parents. Because now it's not just you two as grown adults, you have children now. And if one leaves, especially in our case where we have 3 twins and a toddler, if one leaves, you are single-handed. You definitely need to know where your partner is going, or what the time frame is for their return. Not only does it help you, because you need to know that somebody help is coming. You really do. I don't know how to explain that, but you need to know that help is on the way. And you are not alone, even if it means it's 3 hours or 30 minutes. But just knowing that I am not going to be by myself forever.
That's a whole other.
It's just really something you need to know. But all that to say, we've noticed that the little things that seem like little things when you just get married, if they're not addressed, or if you don't take the time to find the root and try to find solutions, coping mechanisms, they only get better as you reach different milestones in your marriage. No, they're only going to get worse is what I mean, as you reach different milestones in your marriage. So they don't just go away. At least that's what we found. They don't just go away.
No, that hasn't been our experience.
If anything, as you are expanding in your marriage and in your family, the stressors also expand. And so being able to identify them and being able to find coping mechanisms is really important.
And honestly, this conversation actually came out of a conversation that I had with a friend recently, who, felt guilty for sharing his challenges with me. And I was like, listen, man, probably the biggest issue and I told him, I said, the biggest issue that we have created and perpetuated within church is that marriages don't have problems, or that marriages aren't a piece of work, or that marriages, they can be enjoyable, but at the heart there is cultivating. It's cultivating. You are gardening. And if any of you that are watching have gardened, that you're always doing work, even when the fruit or the plants are growing well. Like, you've got to weed, you've got to water, you've got to, you have to prune. when it's ripe, you have to take it off. Like it's always work that's having to be done, and that's not seen as a problem. Like if weeds come up, oh, it's like no, that's what happens. Like it's just and so I was just as a means of encouragement. Um, I realized that there's need not just for him and for us, but also just on a large scale for those that are married or considering marriage to really realize that it's a journey of growth. That's what it is. It's a journey of growth that is centered on exploring the beauty and the beauty and the challenge of vulnerability, and to its highest degree, and that's something that's ever evolving. So,
And when you gave that analogy is really great because it's so true that you see fruit that or even vegetables that come from a garden, and the better they look, the more work was put in. Like it's not just gonna be a pretty little tomato that just came because it grew very well on the vine. No. They had to do some cultivating to make that fruit look as great. Now we're talking about organic and natural farming, not all this other industrialized stuff. But when you know that fruit is what it is because somebody was doing the work, because the weeds did not overtake the tomato vine. Planting was being done. They were tilling and they were making sure that there's something my mom was telling me about. You have to take some of the leaves off the tomato to help it grow even more. Like there's so much you have to do. It is work. And you all know about the whole thing of the grass is greener on the other side, and the reality that, oh, it's green. Like many people have said before, it's green because the water bill is really high out over there. Like it's not just
or they built a well one.
Whatever it is, there was some kind of money that is being spent and time is being put in there to make sure that it looks and stays green. And so when you see a marriage that to you seems healthy or it seems ideal, just know that they are doing some work. There's work taking place. It is not just on a silver platter. We don't have any issues. No, it is a lot of work. And so that's really what we wanted to help bust the myth about trouble in the marriage to some degree. Like you guys know, we just been talking for about 30 minutes that trouble in the marriage can very well be growing pains that ought to be addressed as soon as we identify that we are growing, in order to prevent trouble in the marriage. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Well, guys, let us know your thoughts because
feedback. Feedback.
Let us know your thoughts because this is something that honestly Victor brought it up and I was like, let's have a conversation. And so this is what we were trying to do. And I think it's very liberating to know that I can define something as growing pains, especially as a young couple, to say I can define something as growing pains and not quickly rush to trouble in the marriage. I can define it as growing pains before getting to a place of trouble in the marriage. So
now, and it's also important to realize that growing pains don't mean that you don't need help.
Absolutely.
Like
that's where we were saying that it means you need to do some work.
Yeah, you need to do some work. You may need to reach out to some other resources, people, books. Like that may be necessary. But not seeing yourself as in peril is also very important.
Because there's some of us who we give up as soon as we just, it's
As
like,
soon as it
oh,
feels like trouble, yeah.
ain't no need to even try, ain't no need to even fight, to even, do this and that and the other. So all that to say, there's hope.
There's hope.
There is hope.
There's hope.
And it can be reached. So let us know you guys' thoughts, what you guys think, whether it's something you agree with. If not, like, we just want to have a conversation. I think it's really important as young families to have these conversations, as to help each other out in this journey. Be it if you're married, considering marriage, if you are not considering it, but you're just interested, whatever place you are in life, it's just really, I think, important to be informed and to help along this beautiful journey that marriage is.
There you go.
Okay, they're probably gonna ask what your shirt says.
Oh, it's one of my favorite shirts. And speaking of, since it's Monday, you're like a Monday nobody likes you.
All right, guys.
You just keep it real, eh?
No, this shirt. Every wife has something that they could burn, or they could just take away without their husband knowing.
Well, I guess vulnerability is.
This is the shirt.
We don't. I'm not charging her for these comments.
This is the shirt. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching and for joining us. It's a t-shirt with a message.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Subscribe,
share. We are excited to just be having conversations with you guys. Like we said, we got kids around us, so talking to adults is always fun. You guys have a good one. Peace. Bye.